All right, all right, all right. Happy Mardi Gras, everybody. Punchki Day, if you're from Chicago. My name is Arce Stark. I'm an attorney in Washington, D.C. I guess you can call me a photo lawyer. 90% of my clients are photographers, and I do myriad of things for them. I contract reviews, I file trademarks for them, I deal with copyright litigation, anything that affects a photographer's business legally, I help them with it. So today, I am going to walk you guys through some questions that I get a lot from photographers over the years. I've been doing this for 8 years, you guys always have a lot of different issues that come up, and today I'm gonna hit on some of those things that you guys face on a day-to-day basis, and hopefully you walk away with some good legal knowledge. But remember, this is just for educational purposes. If you really feel like you need some very specific legal information, I definitely encourage you to use this, what you learned today, as a tool, but definitely go out and seek some legal advice if you really need it, if you have a specific question. Because a lot of these questions that we're going to go over today are really fact intensive, and it's a case-by-case situation. So no person is the same in this case. So you may need some extra help, extra advice from a photographer or from an attorney. Okay? So let's get started. And by the way, if you have questions that you think of as we are going through this, feel free to shout it out, and I can help you guys out with that. Okay? Okay, question number 1. If client signs your photo contract, but is taking forever to pay the retainer, can you book another client instead? So, you get a client, you give them the contract, right? They're really interested in booking you. You send it to them. They sign the contract, but then they don't send you the retainer. So you're waiting around for a few days, and then you're getting some more business inquiries in. And someone says, you know what, I wanna book this date, and you're left wondering, man, should I book this other client who's ready to pay? Well, the question is, what does your contract say? So I encourage you to go back to your contract and look, what is required for a person to book your services? It should be a 2-step process. It should be 1, they need to sign the agreement, but 2, they need to pay your retainer. And if both things don't happen, so they pay the retainer, they don't sign the contract, or they sign the contract, they don't pay the retainer, they haven't booked you yet. So you are free to take whatever other business comes your way. You've made no legal promise at that point. In any event, I would still encourage you to go back to that original potential client and say, hey, listen, someone else is interested in this date, you got to pay me like now for the retainer, or else I'm going to take this other person, okay? So keep that in mind. Question number 2. All right, client cancels 1 month after booking you and is demanding a return of the retainer. What should you do? So generally, a photographer requires a 50% down payment, right, for the photography services. That's a general standard that comes up. 50%, so maybe you charge $10,000 package, they pay $5,000 at the beginning. And the wedding is a year and a half out. But 1 month later, the client says, you know what, I can't do this. I don't want to go forward with it. Things went south with my partner, we're not going to get married anymore. Only one, and so can you just give me back that 50%? Because $5,000 is a lot to lose just 30 days after I booked you. Once again, you want to go back to your contract and see what your cancellation policy says. You really should have a very specific cancellation policy that addresses this situation. Generally, I'm sure your retainers, this upfront payment that you get to secure the date for your client, probably says it's non-refundable. Well, you also need to give a reason why as well. You need to state the retainer is non-refundable, but you should also have a little sentence that says it's non-refundable because it's legal consideration, or it's consideration for me holding the date for you and turning away other business. And if you cancel on me, then I will suffer an economic harm. And that's why it's non-refundable. So sorry, 30 days later, no. However, there's a little caveat here. This is really important. Your retainer has to be reasonable. The law requires that any initial payment that is non-refundable needs to be that you say is non-refundable needs to be reasonably related to the actual damage that you would suffer if somebody canceled on you. Doesn't have to be the exact damage, but it has to be somewhat related. So this client of yours might go to court because they paid you $5,000. They only canceled 30 days later, and they're like, I can pay a lawyer $1,000, file a lawsuit against you, and try to get some of my money back. It's worth the expense. And the judge is going to ask, Mr. or Mrs. Photographer, why is your retainer $5,000? And you're going to say, well, that's reasonably related to what I would have suffered, if someone canceled on me. Weddings are booked way far in advance, How am I going to recoup this cost? And the judge is going to ask, well, when is the wedding? Well, it's 18 months from now. You can't book a wedding 18 months from now, and you think you deserve $5,000 for holding a date that you can likely book a wedding for? I don't think that's very reasonable of your actual damage. So you need to think about that. So what I would suggest in your contracts, I'm not saying, sign up clients without requiring a deposit, but I do think, because I've seen a lot of litigation, especially lately with cancellations and COVID and all that stuff, you should have a deposit that's a little less than 50, 25%, 30%, and then you work your way up as the date draws nearer, because that's more reasonable, right? Because it makes sense that your damages would go up as the date gets nearer to the wedding date, because it's less likely then that you're going to recoup any loss right before the wedding. So think about that. Have a staggered, non-refundable payment system that starts smaller, not just 50%, because you're likely to get a client that's going to push back. Okay, so question 3. The venue where the wedding is taking place cancels. Does your client have a right to cancel on you and demand a refund of the retainer? This has happened a lot over the past couple years. The photographer is willing, ready, and able to photograph the wedding, right? The people getting married are wanting their wedding, and they're ready to get married on that date they booked you for. But the Waldorf Astoria, cancels on them, say we can't have this many people as guests now because the government doesn't allow it, the state, local government doesn't allow it, or something like that, right? So, the potential bride and groom are thinking, well, you're kind of expensive anyway, photographer, so let's just cancel and I'm going to hire somebody else and do a backyard wedding or something like that. Give me all my money back. So there's an issue here. The contract that you sign with your client, even though you're able to photograph the wedding, and your client is technically still going to get married on that date, but just at a different location, but they still want to cancel on you, you may have to give that money back, including the retainer, because the location of the wedding was an essential term of the contract. You agreed to provide your services, remember that, on a specific date, but also at a specific place. And now if that place is no longer available, you didn't really hold up your end of the bargain. You couldn't hold up your end of the bargain because it's no longer possible because the venue is not allowing it. So how do you get away from this problem and protect yourself from this? Your force majeure clause, okay? When something bad happens that's out of your control or out of your client's control, generally you refund everything. But what you need to say in there is we don't make any refunds if something happens that's out of our control. We encourage you to reschedule your wedding. And you want to put something else extra in there. If the venue cancels on you or a vendor cancels on you, then we still don't make any refunds. You have to find a new location. The location is not an essential term of this contract. That's what needs to be stated in your agreement. So if the venue cancels, sorry, nothing is refunded. You guys need to find a new place to have the wedding, okay? So something to keep in mind. Those venue clauses usually aren't in contracts, so make sure you go back and look at yours to see if you have something in there like that. All right, number 4. There's a model release in my contract. Does it extend to the guests at the wedding? No, it does not. Most contracts, photography contracts, have a model release for your clients that says, the photographer can use these images for whatever purpose, commercial or not, can alter them, you can do it, distort them, do whatever you want with your own images, you can do that of them. But the second that you start using photos that you've taken of guests at the wedding who have not signed a model release, you need to be really careful on how you use those images, because in most states, this is a state law issue, there's a thing called invasion of privacy. And everybody has a right to control their own likeness, meaning their own face or whatever. So when I take a picture of somebody in the audience and I say, wow, that's great, I'm going to use that on my website, I need to get permission for that because that person didn't give me permission to use them commercially, to use them as an advertisement for my business. All right, so think about that next time you want. I'm not trying to scare you if you have pictures of guests on your website or anything like that, but when in doubt, it's always really good to just ask for permission. And you can even get it verbally too. Hey, I just took a photo of you, it was really great. Do you mind if I use this on my website? You can do it verbally and have that verbal interaction with somebody, because that will go a long way if the person turns around and says, take it down, I didn't give you permission. All right, so think about that too. And just to piggyback on that a second, is that a lot of photographers think, oh, well, I own the copyright to the image, so I can do whatever I want. Copyright is different than right of privacy. All right, yeah, you own the photo and you can prevent someone from infringing it and taking it from you, and you can sue them for that reason. But just because you took it doesn't mean you have the right to do everything you want with it. All right, so think about that next time. Number 5. Should I copyright my photos? It really depends. It really depends whether you want added protection. A lot of photographers, this is true to a certain extent. You are a copyright owner the second you click your shutter button and you take an image. You own that image. That image is yours, right? But you don't have a legal copyright in that image until you register it with the Copyright Office. So the Copyright Office is like a real thing. It's a building in Washington, D.C., it's an agency, it's a federal agency, and when you submit your image to them and you fill out their application, then you get the full weight of the copyright law behind you. And when you have the full weight of the copyright law behind you, you can enforce your rights against other people. A lot of people don't know this, but when you see someone that has stolen your image, and you're like, ugh, they took my image, I'm going to send them an invoice, I'm going to send them a cease and desist letter. If they're savvy on the other side, they're going to say, well, do you have it registered with the Copyright Office? And if you don't, then you actually cannot even sue them. You are not allowed to go to court. Jurisdiction, the court will throw out your lawsuit in 2 seconds because you have no legal right to go to court unless you've actually submitted your photo to the Copyright Office and gotten a copyright registration from them. It's really easy to do. You can do it online. You create an account with the Copyright Office. All right, you fill out the application. You can submit several hundred images at once. You pay a one-time fee. It's $55. I would recommend that photographers work this into their practice. So when you finish editing your images and you send out that final gallery to your client, you should have your assistant do it, or whoever, if you have one, and you upload all those images at the Copyright Office and you click send, and that's it. They do not have to be high-res images. They can be thumbnails, but you just got to get them sent over to the Copyright Office. And so that way, if someone does take your photo, you have a copyright to enforce your rights. Real quickly, when you have a copyright, not only do you have the right to go to court, but this is really good, is if you have it registered before someone takes your photo, before someone steals it, you have the right to get all of your attorney's fees paid for by the other side, which could be way more than what you're asking for as a damage. So it could be thousands of dollars. You can go to court, all your court costs, attorney's fees are paid for by the other side if you go to court and win. That's a real huge negotiating tool. So you want to be able to have that. If you don't have your copyright, then you don't have that option, okay? So get it registered. At the very least, put your watermark on there. Because if someone removes the watermark, that's also a violation of the law as well. So it's something, an added extra layer of protection. Okay. Someone has taken my images, can I demand payment? So this really goes back to whether your image is registered with the Copyright Office. So you can always send out a letter and demand that they pay you a reasonable licensing fee for use of your image. It's much easier to get an image taken down than it is to get paid for someone stealing it. I know a lot of times, someone steals it and people will, you fire off an invoice for a ton of money thinking like they have to pay me. And that's not always how it works. But it's much easier to get it taken down. So if you're gonna demand payment, one, it's easier if you have the copyright registration, like we talked about too. Okay, but two, you have to think about how much you're going to ask, and this is where the licensing comes in, because if you just give away photos to people who ask for images from you, then you're gonna have a tough time demanding a payment for someone's misuse of your image if you just generally give them out for free. So you want to think about, okay, if I'm going to demand payment, I really need to make sure this is actually what I charge people for licensing. Because if once you send out that demand letter and they hire an attorney and you guys all end up going to court, somewhere along the line, you're going to have to prove to the judge and to the other side that, yeah, my photos are worth $3,500 because someone used it on their webpage or something like that. And then they're going to ask you for proof of that. But if you've never licensed an image before, then you really don't have proof that your images are worth that amount of money, right? So just think about this, going forward. Like, okay, well, how much are my images really worth? What do I license them for? And if you haven't licensed any images, that's fine too. But you could start now and think about, if someone were to use my photo, this is what I would generally charge. And you could have that worked up. So that way you have a way to prove your damages if that happens. One thing about registering your image though, if you register your image with the Copyright Office before any infringement occurred, before someone steals your photo, the law actually allows you to ask for a specific amount of money, starting at $750, without actually having to prove that your image is worth $750. That's the benefit. It's called statutory damages. You get a benefit of getting a certain amount of money if you go to court and win, no matter what. No matter if you give away your images for free. If someone infringes your copyright, you sue them and you win, you will get a minimum of $750. Okay, up to $75,000, up to $150,000 if it's willful infringement, meaning someone took your photo and they knew you were the copyright owner and they just should have known better, right? And they did it on purpose and they had the wherewithal and the education to know that what they were doing was wrong. You can get more money. And you don't have to prove that was your actual loss to you. Or there is the statutory damage. The law allows you to collect a certain amount without actually having to prove actual damage. So that whole thing I said about licensing images and how much you would do that for, really doesn't apply in that situation. You get an extra benefit if you register your images early before the infringement happens. All right. So. Last question here. Okay, I'm just running a photo business. Do I really need a lawyer to help me with legal issues? Lawyers are kind of scary sometimes. It's like, it kind of feels like it brings things up to a next level to get a lawyer. And not only that, but they can also be very, very expensive. So it really kind of depends on what you think you need. It's like, when you are hurt or feeling sick, you kind of know whether or not you need to go to a doctor. It's just like, oh, I can kind of ride this out and I'll be fine, or do I really need to see what the heck is going on? The same thing, pay attention to that with any legal issue you have. Like, can I really just kind of ride this out, or do I really need to get some advice? And the thing is we don't really know what we don't know. So if there's a situation where you think you need some extra help, then yeah, I definitely encourage people to go seek out legal advice. It's like also, as a photographer, I'm sure the Uncle Bobs at weddings who just get their camera and think they're professional photographers that are getting in your way. Somebody might think, oh, I just get my uncle to photograph this wedding. I don't need a professional photographer. And maybe their images might come out okay, but maybe they're not going to get what they hope for. It's the same thing with legal advice too. Yeah, maybe you can go online and find some tools to help you out, but maybe it's not going to probably come out in the same way as if you got a real professional to do it. So think about that if you're ever in a situation where you're just a little skeptical, because right now, just as a side, I've dealt more litigation cases in the past couple of years than I have in the last 8 years I've been practicing law. And I feel like, especially with the pandemic, people, one, they don't have as much money as they did, and two, they're just kind of over everything. So if somebody feels like they're just getting the short end, they're gonna file lawsuits against people. So I've dealt with a lot of lawsuits lately defending photographers from their own clients for issues of cancellation and images and all sorts of things. So think about that. For whatever reason, that's just the way people are headed. So that might help you decide whether or not you need actual legal advice. But with that, that's it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shout them out. I don't know how much time we have, but so go ahead. Yeah.
Issue of copyright.
Okay.
Some company ever took your image, right? They copyrighted it. You find out my copyright is supersede theirs.
Okay, so the question was if you're dealing with two, so if you have a copyright in your image and someone else has a copyright in that same image, so does your copyright supersede their copyright? So generally, only one person can get a copyright because you own it, you took it. The copyright goes to the author of the image, the person who took it. You might get a situation though where you took an image, you didn't copyright it, you gave it to your clients, who may have been a hotel, for example, you gave it to the marketing team, and then they filed a copyright on that image. In that situation, you would have to go to court and try to get that copyright placed in your name out of the person who did it. However, you have to be careful with these contracts when you work with corporations. This happens all the time. It's very important when you're doing marketing photography is that you read their agreement, because the agreement is generally going to come from the corporation side. And in that agreement, you read it very carefully, because you are likely assigning all of your rights to them, all of your copyrights to them. And you're going to be considered what's called a work for hire, meaning that anything you take and do, your raw images, every single image you take is not your property, it's the corporation's property. It's as if they took the photos. And not only that, you can't use them. So since they own the copyright and you put them on your website to use, you are actually infringing them, and they could sue you. And a lot of people don't realize that, but I took the image. So what I would suggest a lot of people do in that situation is they work out a license with the corporation, and they say, okay, fine, I'm giving you my copyrights, you own it all, but can you assign me a license so I can use these images for my own personal portfolio or what have you? So, anything else? Will they charge you? So the question was, will the corporation charge you? Maybe, maybe not. That's something you could work out with them. I mean, you are hopefully doing this for money for them anyway, so you're already getting some money. So in that negotiation process with them, you could say, as a standard of practice, we'll assign you the copyright, but we always need a license granted to us so we can use it for our own personal portfolio. And if they don't, then what you may want to include in that agreement with them is that, okay, fine, we won't have a license, we won't have any rights, but we're going to be handling your photos, we're going to be editing your photos, we have assistants who are editing our photos, maybe you have a social media person. We need to make sure, corporation, that you're not going to sue us in the event that we accidentally publish one of these images, because maybe you forgot. Maybe you're like, this is a great image, and you put it on your Instagram, or somebody else did it. So you need to make sure that you have some sort of limit of liability in that contract that states, okay, any accidental publication, you guys can't sue us. We'll just take it down within 24 hours or something to that effect. So, all right, cool. Well, thanks a lot, you guys. Enjoy the rest of the time at the WPPI. You guys can use this QR code if you need. It's an outline for a contract, so that might be helpful to see how your contracts stack up with this stuff.